Here we are for part 2 of the DV6 build, and this video is going to be all about the electronics install. Now, you'll notice that I'm working on a hilt side NeoPixel connector first. This isn't terribly difficult if you were experienced at soldering and fitting things up properly, but you can always buy your own connectors already assembled, and that's what I would recommend for most people. So I applied a bit of flux to the pins after placing one in each hole, and I'm giving them a generous but not excessive amount of solder. Soldering itself is what you need to be good at here, as poor soldering techniques can cause issues. Too much solder or improperly applied heat can leave you with a poor joint or pins that aren't square to the board, or even jammed pins if the solder gets inside of the two pin halves. As always, clean up the residue with some isopropyl alcohol and a cotton swab. My pins are straight and functional, and my joints are excellent, so on to the next step. Sometimes you will find that your PCB does not fit into its holder. Just trim any legs left over from the manufacturing process and sand the edges if it needs it. You're aiming for a tight fit, as the connector should not be loose in the holder. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know I like to lay out all my parts and draw up my circuit before anything else. Trust me when I say that it saves a lot of time later on. Having done those things already, I have all my wires trimmed slightly longer than necessary for each of their runs, and now it's just a matter of stripping them and soldering in place. When soldering to your blade connector, I recommend bending your wires at 90 degrees prior to soldering. It makes the whole process much smoother. Now all those wires get fed through the holder and the connector gets snapped in place. And just for a little extra insurance, I put a bit of E6000 on the backside of the connector to keep it firmly in place, but also to keep the joints from ever being stressed. Now I highly recommend keeping track of your wires. People knock me for using all one color wire, saying that there's no point and it only causes confusion. And they would be right, of course, if I didn't like the uniformity so much and if I didn't label every single one of them as I go. To each their own. But even if you can use a different color for everything, you still need to keep track of what color goes where. Simply put, stay organized while you work. Okay, moving on to this circuit board. I need to change its function a little to get it the way I need it to be, but don't worry about it unless you're building a 2-button setup on the original Parks DV6 with the original switchboard. As an extra precaution against short circuits, I'm insulating the board's underside with E6000. And again, I'm labeling here with small pieces of tape. With the switches secured in place, I need to prep the battery. This battery is going to be non-removable and as such needs soldered to directly. It varies by battery construction, but this can be a bit tricky work sometimes. It requires surface sanding, plenty of flux, and a slightly unnerving amount of heat considering the battery type you're working with. I recommend pre-tinning the battery first. I'm rewrapping the battery as I wanted a thicker insulation for this install. With that done, I'm soldering my wires to the battery terminals. It is very important that these solder joints are good and strong. You'll also notice I like keeping my power lead split at the battery. Everyone has different preferences on this. Pick what works best for you and for the install you are working with. With the connector and battery soldered and in place, I'm moving on to the speaker. Keep in mind, speaker polarity is not important with most saber installs because you don't have to worry about it being out of phase with another speaker unless your build incorporates more than one speaker. I can't stand leaving the legs at full length on my recharge ports, so I trim them with wire or side cutters, and I generally smooth out the edges because it soothes my OCD. Standard reminder to always remove your SD card before you start soldering, that way you won't damage it. And keep in mind that pre-tinning will make your life easier when it comes time to make your connections. You can always use single LED PCBs for accents, but you can also cut one from a scrap piece of strip like I tend to do. Just make sure you scrape away the coating over the contacts, otherwise they are a pain to solder to. Also, don't overheat them as the diode can get melty real quick, and then you have to start over with a new one. For this LED, I need incoming and outgoing wires, and it will be one of 2 that I'm using to light the crystal. Next, I'll be putting the recharge port in place. You don't want to over torque anything or bear down too hard on the chassis here. Remember, it's just plastic. I'm feeding the speaker wires through their appropriate channel, and then the speaker sits snugly in the chassis. It will be glued later. Now I'm getting the remaining power lead attached to the recharge port, and then securing the lower crystal chamber LED over it. E6000 is my go-to for this. Now the upper LED can be soldered in before being installed to its final position. I'm not going to lie, positioning and securing this one was slightly tricky. It took a bit of finessing, but everything went into place just fine in the end. The set screw was then snugged against the chassis, securing it to the upper hilt half. Before the final power connection to the recharge port, it's time to make sure you have a kill key in. Another good reminder here to always put your heat shrink on before soldering. Now I've placed the board holder into the chassis and I can start making final connections to the board. A couple important things here are getting appropriate wire angles for ease of manipulating them into place in the chassis, and making sure you don't touch anything with your iron other than the intended pads on the board. At this point I am done soldering and the SD card can go back into the board, followed by the best moment of every install, the first in-hilt boot up.
Be careful not to choke on your lacerations, Director.
Everything is working properly so I can finish securing the board in place and installing the door over it. Now final assembly is just a matter of putting all hilt pieces back together. Remember, don't over torque things. It's just a quick way to get real sad after a lot of hard work. I've learned that lesson enough times. The faux fasteners on the upper hilt need a little E6000 to secure them in place. I actually do use a generous amount for these. However, the switch plungers need small, precise applications of adhesive, so as not to get into the switches and ruin them. I was so beyond happy with the way this build turned out. It just has a very good look and feeling to it. I'm not big into owning movie hilts anymore, but I still may get a nice DV6 for myself at some point. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate the interest and support from all of you for the content that I enjoy sharing. I wish you all well, and I'll see you again soon.